Hey guys, it's me again, the Obsidian Pixie. This is kind of my introductory video for my booktube channel. In this video, I'm going to be doing a couple things actually. One of the things I'm going to be doing is the booktube newbie tag, and I'm also going to be doing the do you have this book tag. So just to tell you a little bit about myself to start with, I am currently a stay-at-home mom. I have two kids, one is 6 and one is 9. And I'm doing this booktube channel kind of as a way to expand my own horizons. So let's get started with the booktube newbie tags. Firstly, why did you start this channel? I've been doing a lot of readathons lately and getting to know a lot of people online through the readathons. And a lot of the people I've been getting to know online have booktube channels of their own. Book Roast, Septimus Snape, people like them. I will put links to both of their channels in the bottom. But it sounded like it might be something fun to do where I get to talk about books, which is something I love to do. And just kind of, like I said, kind of expand my horizons, do something a little bit out of my comfort zone. What are some fun and unique things you can bring to booktube? Well, I can't promise to be fun or unique. I can promise to be myself. Hopefully you will find that fun and unique. The only thing I can say is that not only am I an avid reader, I am attempting to be a writer. I'm currently working on completing my first novel. When I finally get my Patreon up and running, I will put links to that in my description as well. So hopefully I can look at things not only from a reader's perspective, but from a writer's perspective. And just hopefully you find watching my videos amusing and comfortable, kind of like sitting and chatting with a friend. What are you most excited for about the new channel? I'm excited to try something new and learn new things. I never ever expected that I would be the kind of person to make videos and put them out online, but here I am and that's what I'm doing. So it's exciting to me to be doing something like that, but it is also a challenge, which answers one of the other questions. What challenges do you think there will be to starting a new booktube channel, and what do you think will be hardest to overcome? So yeah, I'm excited and challenged by the whole idea. And like I said, learning new things, learning to use editing software for one. Yeah, so those are things that I am both excited for and challenged by. What questions would you ask your favorite booktubers? I don't know that I'd really have specific questions for them, but I think that it would be really cool to just sit down and have coffee and conversation with some of them. Just sit and visit with them and talk about books like old friends. And like I said, that is kind of what I'm hoping to, the feeling I'm hoping to create here as well. The next questions. When did you start reading, and what book or series got you into reading? This is a little bit of a complicated question for me because the truth is I don't know. I don't remember learning how to read. I just remember knowing how. According to my family, my parents, my grandparents, aunts and uncles, I started reading when I was about 3 or 4, and they say that the first book I ever read was 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. I don't remember starting to learn to read. The first books I remember really getting into were the Babysitter's Club books, and I'm sure that probably dates me a little bit, but that's okay. I devoured those books. I think I read most, if not all, of the series when it was out, and yeah, but officially I do not know when I started reading. But why do you love reading? I love reading because I love meeting new people, the people in the books, and I love getting to visit new places, and I love having somebody tell me about something and getting to imagine it in my head. And it's why I like writing too. I like being able to tell somebody about something and hearing them imagine it in their heads. That's really fascinating for me. Where do you read? I read anywhere I can take a book. If I'm on the bus, which I tried not to ride the bus, but if I'm on the bus, I like to have a book. If I'm waiting in a waiting room for an appointment, I like to have a book. If I have a bath, I take a book. If I can take a book there, I'm reading there. That's kind of the way it goes. What kind of books do you like to read? Kind of segues nicely into the second part of this video, the do you have this book tag. But the truth is I like to read a lot of different things. My favorite genres are probably fantasy and romance. In fantasy, that includes urban fantasy, high fantasy, traditional fantasy with swords and things like that, paranormal fantasy, all sorts of different things. I also have horror, a little bit of sci-fi, some paranormal books, some comedy books, some high drama books, little bits of everything. I really do like to read whatever I can get my hands on for the most part. So moving on to the do you have this book tag, we're going to start with a book with deckled edges. This took me a while to find. I'm sure I have more, but I couldn't seem to find them when I was looking for them. Eventually I did find this, a series of unfortunate events. We have, I think, the first 9 books in this series, and they do have those nice deckled, natural-looking edges, not the really sharp, clear, finely cut ones that most books have. A book with 3 or more people on the cover. I found Willow, has Mad Mardigan, Sorceress, and Willow on the cover. This is the novelization of the movie that came out in the 80s. I do love the movie. The movie is incredible. This book is okay. It tells a little bit more of the story than the movie does in some ways, but the movie is infinitely better in my opinion. Although this is a good book, I'm actually thinking I might be rereading it shortly. A book based on another fictional story. Have The Black Swan by Mercedes Lackey. This is a retelling of the Swan Lake story. The main character is Odile. She is the daughter of the evil sorcerer von Rothbart, who is the one that turned Odette into the swan in the first place. And it's kind of about her and how she grows into her powers and her own opinions and out from, you know, what everybody else wants from her and into what she wants for herself. A book that has exactly 10 letters in the title. This is another Mercedes Lackey book. She is one of my favorite authors. You can see here I have 3 full shelves of her work. This is By the Sword, which does in fact have exactly 10 letters in the title. The main character here is Carowyn. It's about her and how she grows up, again, out of what her parents want for her and into what she wants for herself, which is she winds up becoming a mercenary. So she is literally living by her sword. A book that has the first and last letter of the title are the same. I actually picked the Twilight books for this particular question. The first 3 books in the series, Twilight, New Moon, and Eclipse, all have the same first and last letter in the title. Do you have a mass market book? 3 out of the 4 I've shown you so far are mass market books. That's most of what's on these shelves is mass market. I prefer mass market books, to be honest. I find them easier to hold, maneuver, carry around. My husband prefers hardcovers, and somewhere in the middle is trades. So we do have a lot of all of those kinds of books in our massive collection. A book written by an author using a pen name. I picked The Regulators by Richard Bachman, which was a pen name of Stephen King's. He wrote several books under the name Richard Bachman at one point, and then when he decided he didn't want to write as Richard Bachman anymore, he killed him. Which sounds kind of odd, but that's the way it is. If I remember correctly, this book was actually published after Richard Bachman supposedly died, and there's also a companion book to this written by Stephen King called Desperation. I have read both of them. I think the only one I have right now is The Regulators. I'm not sure what happened to my copy of Desperation. The next one, a book with the character's name in the title. I do have a couple, including all of the Harry Potter books, but I picked this one, Polgara the Sorceress. This was the first book by David and Lee Eddings that I ever read, and I loved it. The funny thing about that is this is actually the last book in the Belgariad and the Malorian series, but it does stand alone fairly well as well. Polgara this is the story of kind of her life, when it starts before she was born and continues through several centuries of just a fascinating, wonderful existence. And I wish I had the strength that she shows in some of the things that she goes through. So this is a book with a character's name in the title. A book that has 2 maps. Took me a while to find one, which is kind of funny because I do have a lot of fantasy novels. You'd think that fantasy novels would have maps. Eventually I found this one, The Golden Book of Fairy. It is, if I remember correctly, 4 stories in one book. And it's about kind of the crossovers between our world and the world of fairy. And again, I haven't read it in quite a while, so I don't remember exactly a lot about it, but I did look, and it does in fact have 2 maps right here. And I'm hoping that I will get to reread this book again fairly soon. A book that has been turned into a TV show. Again, I had a couple things to choose from. I do have the Game of Thrones books. I have, excuse me, I'm sure I have a couple other ones, although for the life of me, I can't think of them at the moment other than Game of Thrones. But the one I picked was The Blood Books by Tanya Huff. They were turned into the TV series Blood Ties on Lifestyle, I believe. This is an omnibus edition, has the first 2 books, Blood Price and Blood Trial. And they're about a lady named Victoria Nelson. She was a police detective, but was diagnosed with a degenerative eye condition and has now since become a private detective. And unfortunately, a lot of her cases wind up being very supernatural, which she's not very happy about to start with, but it kind of winds up becoming her bread and butter. I highly recommend these books. And I do recommend the TV series as well. It only lasted for 2 seasons, but I found it a really fun thing to watch. A book by an author that was originally famous for something else. Again, I do have a couple. I have a RuPaul book. I do have the Meatloaf autobiography, which was written by him with someone else. But I decided to go with this one, The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell by Chris Colfer. This is a middle grade or young reader's book. Chris Colfer was originally Kurt on Glee, a show which I actually really enjoyed. So when I saw that he'd written a book, I was kind of curious. I'd actually like to get the rest of the books in the series. I haven't read them, but this one was fascinating. I couldn't put it down. So the idea of reading the rest of the books in the series sounds really exciting to me. And you can see he's got his cute little picture here on the back. A book with a clock on the cover. I thought that this one would be easier to find than it turned out to be. I have books with time in the titles of them, no clocks on them. I have books with clock in the title of them, no clocks on them. I looked and looked and looked, and finally I found this, Lady of Hay, which has a cute little watch sitting here in a puddle. Lady of Hay and Barbara Erskine, she writes a lot of books about women that are regressing into past lives, usually in the Middle Ages. This particular one is about a lady named Jo that is regressing into a lady named Matilda from the time of King John, 800 years ago, if I remember correctly. And yeah, they're very psychological books, but very fascinating. She's put a lot of research into the history of the time that these ladies are regressing into. So it's a little bit heavy. It's a fairly long book, but I really, really enjoyed it. A book of poetry. Not a very interesting cover, but this is the selected works of Alfred Lord Tennyson. You might know him as the author of Charge of the Light Brigade or The Lady of Shalott. Anybody who's familiar with Anne of Green Gables is probably familiar with The Lady of Shalott, and that's actually where I got interested in this book, because I wanted to read the whole poem that Anne is so fascinated by. A book with an award stamp. I picked this one, A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine LEngle. This is a Newbery Award medal. I have the whole series of this. I have not read them all in a very long time. They are kind of fantasy, but there is a lot of science and math and stuff in them, which is not entirely my cup of tea. So, like I said, I have read them all, but not in a really long time, and I don't necessarily remember a lot about what's in them. A book by an author with the same initials as you. My initials are MM. I had a really hard time finding a book by an author with those initials. I know that there are several out there. I just don't have any of their books. Finally, I was able to find this, Little Critter by Mercer Mayer. Like I said, I do have 2 children. We have a couple Mercer Mayer books, and they are really adorable stories for kids, particularly this one. This is, I think, 4 stories together, and it's written under the premise that Little Critter and his sister are sharing a room, and he's trying to tell her stories to get her to go to sleep. A book of short stories. I do have several. I was an English major when I was in university, so I do have a couple of my textbooks, like the Norton Anthologies of Literature, things like that. But the one for short stories I picked was this. This is Bradbury stories, and as you can probably tell by the title, it is a selection of short stories by Ray Bradbury. I'm not sure if my favorite stories are in here. My favorite of his stories are The Veldt and There Will Come Soft Rains. But this is a book that my husband got, I believe, as a gift. And he's a really big fan of Ray Bradbury. There's a ton of stories in there. It is a huge book. A book that ends between 500 and 510 pages. I went through so many of the books on my shelf looking for a book that fit this prompt. I had books that were 498 pages. I had books that were 511 pages. Finding a book that was between 500 and 510 was really hard, but finally I found Aragon by Christopher Paolini. This is the first book in his series, and if I remember correctly, this book has 509 pages, so it just fits. I've read, I think, the first 3 of the 4 books in this series. They were okay. They're not my favorites, but considering the fact I think he was 16 or something when the first one came out, that's pretty impressive. A book that was turned into a movie. Again, I have several. I have the Twilight movies, or the Twilight books over here. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children is over here, as well as Inkheart. I have, excuse me, a couple different Neil Gaiman books that have been turned into movies, or miniseries as the case may be. The one I picked was The Lucky One by Nicholas Sparks. I do have a couple Nicholas Sparks books. They're not my favorite. They're just not my favorite genre. But they are enjoyable. This one, part of what makes this one of my favorite ones of his is just the character's internal struggle. The main character, Logan Thibault. And it was a really good movie as well. I also really enjoyed the movie. A graphic novel. We do have several again. My husband is a big fan of graphic novels. He's read Amulet, Bone. We have both of those entire series. I have a couple of the Richard Castle, Derek Storm graphic novels. I have a set of graphic novels that was originally a webcomic, the Earthsong Saga. I have Dark Crystal graphic novels, whole bunch. The ones I picked for this is Lenore by Roman Dirge. These are much darker than your average graphic novel, I think. If I remember correctly, the little girl Lenore is in fact dead. So I got into these a long time ago because my older cousin was into them. This is, again, an omnibus edition. This is volumes 1 through 4. Next, and the last one, is a book written by 2 or more authors. I did mention we have several Neil Gaiman books. I picked Good Omens, written by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I'm not sure if you're aware, this was this was recently turned into a limited series show on Amazon. I think there's 6 or 8 episodes. I don't exactly remember. I just know I watched them and they were incredible. The book itself is also incredible. Reading through it, there's certain scenes where you're kind of like, okay, that feels very much like it was written by Neil Gaiman, or there's other scenes that feel very much like they were written by Terry Pratchett, and there's other scenes where you can't tell who wrote them, but they are awesome. So this was written by 2 different authors. So that is a little bit about me and a little bit about my bookshelf. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will put a couple links down there for the Book Roast YouTube and my friend Septimus Snape's YouTube. And yeah, just hit like, share, subscribe if you feel like it, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Bye.